Someone's out to tell her that jacket looks like it came from a thrift store. Lieutenant Colonel Bradford muttered to Major Kellerman as they watched the woman cross the Pentagon courtyard. The faded olive fabric hung loose on her small frame, and whatever patch adorned her left shoulder had seen better days. Kellerman chuckled and shook his head. Probably picked it up at some surplus shop, thinking it makes her look official. The morning sun cast long shadows across the concrete as staff officers hurried between buildings, most barely glancing at the unremarkable figure making her way toward the main entrance. Staff Sergeant Elena Vasquez had heard worse. 23 years of military service had taught her that first impressions rarely told the complete story, and the whispered comments following her through the corridors of power no longer stung the way they once did. Her weathered combat boots clicked steadily against the polished floors as she navigated the maze of hallways leading to Conference Room Alpha 7. The briefing jacket she wore had indeed seen better days, its fabric softened by countless washings and field operations most of these desk officers could never imagine. Before we continue with Elena's story, drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from. Maybe you've witnessed moments where someone's service was underestimated in your community. The conference room buzzed with conversation as Elena approached the heavy oak doors. Through the glass panels, she could see the assembled officers, their crisp dress uniforms creating a sea of ribbons and polished brass. Captain Morrison noticed her first, nudging his companion with barely concealed amusement. "Check out the jacket on that one. Looks like she raided her grandfather's closet." The comment rippled through the nearby group, generating quiet laughter and exchanged glances. Elena paused outside the doorway, her hand resting on the brass handle. The patch on her shoulder had become a source of curiosity and quiet mockery over the past several months. Most observers saw only a faded rectangular piece of fabric with indistinct markings, hardly the sort of decoration that commanded respect in these halls. What they couldn't see, what the casual glances failed to register, were the subtle details that would mean everything to those who knew what to look for. The door opened with a soft click, and conversation diminished as Elena stepped into the room. 47 pairs of eyes tracked her movement as she made her way toward an empty chair near the back wall. Major Phillips leaned toward his seatmate and whispered, "Wonder what she did to earn a spot in here. Probably someone's secretary getting coffee duty." The observation drew suppressed chuckles from the surrounding officers, their attention already shifting back to their previous conversations as Elena settled into her seat. The morning briefing would cover standard operational updates, nothing that required her input or expertise. Elena had learned long ago to blend into the background during these gatherings, to observe without drawing attention to herself or her unusual presence among the higher-ranking officers. Her fingers unconsciously traced the edge of the worn patch, remembering the weight of responsibility it represented and the sacrifices that had earned her the right to wear it. General Patterson would arrive in 15 minutes to begin the formal proceedings. Until then, the assembled officers continued their casual conversations, their voices creating a steady murmur of professional discourse mixed with personal observations. None of them paid particular attention to the quiet woman in the faded jacket. None of them bothered to look closely at the patch that had become the subject of so much casual derision. Lieutenant Colonel Roberts glanced in Elena's direction and shook his head slightly. Someone should really establish a dress code for these briefings. Standards seem to be slipping everywhere you look these days. His comment carried just enough volume to reach the surrounding officers, generating nods of agreement and knowing looks. The consensus seemed clear that Elena's presence represented some sort of administrative oversight, a clerical error that had placed her among personnel far above her apparent station. Elena remained motionless in her chair, her dark eyes taking in every detail of the room and its occupants. She had attended hundreds of similar briefings over the years, had sat in rooms just like this one while plans were made and decisions rendered that would affect thousands of lives. The casual dismissal no longer surprised her, though it never failed to remind her how easily people could overlook the most important details when they thought they already understood what they were seeing. The heavy footsteps in the corridor announced General Patterson's approach before his aide opened the conference room doors. "Room attention!" The command echoed sharply as 47 officers rose in perfect unison, their chairs scraping against polished hardwood. Elena stood with the rest, her movement fluid and precise, the muscle memory of decades overriding the casual dismissal she had endured moments earlier. The general entered with the bearing of a man accustomed to absolute authority, his silver hair immaculately groomed, and his uniform displaying an impressive array of ribbons and decorations. "Take your seats," the general commanded, settling behind the mahogany podium at the front of the room. His steel-gray eyes swept across the assembled officers, cataloging faces and noting attendance with the practiced efficiency of a career military leader. Elena remained standing a fraction of a second longer than necessary, old habits demanding she show proper respect even when that respect was rarely returned. She had served under generals like Patterson before, men whose decisions shaped the destiny of nations and whose approval could make or break military careers. Major Kellerman leaned slightly toward his companion, his voice barely audible above the rustling of papers and settling of uniforms. "Still can't figure out why she's here. Personnel must have made some kind of mistake with the invitation list." His observation drew subtle nods from nearby officers, their attention divided between the general's opening remarks and the continuing mystery of Elena's presence among their ranks. The consensus remained that administrative error was the most logical explanation for her attendance at such a high-level briefing. General Patterson began his presentation with an overview of current operations in 3 separate theaters, his laser pointer highlighting strategic positions on the massive wall display. Elena listened intently, her trained mind automatically processing the information and identifying potential challenges that others might overlook. She had operated in 2 of the 3 regions under discussion, had walked the ground, and understood the terrain in ways that satellite imagery could never fully convey. Her fingers unconsciously traced the worn edges of her jacket sleeve, remembering the weight of equipment and the constant vigilance required in hostile territory. The briefing continued with detailed analyses of enemy movements, supply chain logistics, and projected timeline assessments. Captain Morrison found himself glancing repeatedly at Elena, trying to reconcile her unremarkable appearance with her obvious familiarity with the complex operational details being discussed. She never took notes, never asked questions, but her attention never wavered from the presentations unfolding at the front of the room. Something about her quiet confidence suggested depths that her faded jacket and modest demeanor failed to reveal. 15 minutes into the general's presentation, Lieutenant Colonel Bradford decided to test his theory about Elena's administrative placement. He rose slightly from his chair and addressed the room in a voice designed to carry authority. "Excuse me, General, but I believe there may have been an error with today's attendance roster. Some personnel appear to be present who might be better served attending support staff briefings instead." His pointed glance in Elena's direction left no doubt about the target of his observation, and several officers turned to follow his gaze with expressions of agreement and satisfaction. General Patterson paused his presentation, his laser pointer frozen on the wall display as he absorbed the interruption. His eyes moved methodically across the room, taking in the subtle tension that had emerged among his assembled officers. Elena remained perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap and her expression neutral, giving no indication that she had heard or understood the veiled criticism directed her way. The silence stretched for long seconds as the general's gaze finally settled on the source of the comment. "I see that some of you have concerns about attendance protocols," General Patterson replied, his tone carrying the measured control of a man accustomed to maintaining discipline without raising his voice. "Rest assured that every individual present today has been specifically invited based on their qualifications and current assignments. Perhaps we should focus on the briefing materials rather than second-guessing personnel decisions that have already been made at levels above this room." The subtle rebuke landed with surgical precision, causing Bradford to settle back into his seat with slightly reddened cheeks. Elena felt the familiar mixture of gratitude and resignation that accompanied such moments. Senior officers occasionally defended her presence, though rarely with full understanding of the circumstances that had brought her to their briefings. She had learned to accept these partial protections while maintaining the discretion that her unique position demanded. The patch on her shoulder carried secrets that most of these men would never be cleared to know, operations that existed in classified shadows far beyond their current security levels. The presentation resumed with discussions of personnel rotations and equipment allocations, topics that generated animated discussions among the assembled officers. Elena noted the subtle hierarchies and unspoken alliances that revealed themselves through seating arrangements and speaking patterns. Major Phillips clearly sought advancement through vocal agreement with senior officials, while Captain Morrison appeared more focused on genuine understanding of operational complexities. These observations had served her well throughout her career, helping her navigate the treacherous waters of military politics while maintaining focus on mission requirements. As the briefing approached its halfway point, Elena allowed herself a moment of reflection on the journey that had brought her to this conference room. The path from enlisted personnel to her current position had been neither straight nor simple, marked by deployments that officially never happened and achievements that could never be publicly acknowledged. The faded patch on her shoulder represented sacrifices that these desk-bound officers could scarcely imagine, losses that still visited her dreams during the darkest hours before dawn. The break between briefing sessions provided opportunity for informal conversations and coffee refills from the ornate service station near the tall windows overlooking the courtyard. Elena remained seated while most officers rose to stretch their legs and engage in the ritualistic networking that characterized such gatherings. She had learned that movement during breaks often invited unwanted attention and questions she was not authorized to answer fully. Better to maintain her position and observe the social dynamics that revealed so much about professional relationships and hidden agendas. Major Phillips approached the coffee station with deliberate casualness, positioning himself where his voice would carry to the surrounding group of officers. I keep trying to place her face, but nothing comes to mind from any of the standard personnel rosters. You would think someone attending these briefings would have crossed paths with the rest of us at some point during normal operations. His tone suggested genuine puzzlement mixed with growing suspicion about Elena's credentials and background. Several nearby officers nodded in agreement, their own mental searches through military social networks yielding similar blank results. Captain Morrison found himself studying Elena more intently than professional courtesy typically allowed. Her bearing suggested extensive field experience, the way she unconsciously positioned herself with clear sight lines to both entrances and maintained situational awareness even during casual moments. These were habits developed through necessity rather than training, reflexes that spoke to operational experience in genuinely dangerous environments. Yet nothing about her appearance or demeanor suggested the sort of prestigious assignments that would warrant inclusion in high-level strategic briefings. Lieutenant Colonel Roberts joined the growing conversation near the coffee service, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to having his opinions taken seriously. Perhaps someone should simply ask her directly about her current assignment and clearance level. This dancing around the obvious question serves no productive purpose when we have legitimate concerns about security protocols and need to know access to sensitive information. His suggestion generated murmurs of agreement from the assembled officers, though none seemed eager to personally confront Elena about her qualifications. Elena felt the weight of their collective scrutiny without turning to acknowledge it directly. She had endured similar discussions countless times throughout her career, had listened to speculation and doubt expressed by personnel who lacked the security clearances necessary to understand her true role within the military hierarchy. The irony was never lost on her that those who questioned her presence most vocally were often the least qualified to comprehend the nature of her actual responsibilities and achievements. The patch on her shoulder remained the primary focus of their curiosity and derision. From a distance, It appeared unremarkable, perhaps even shabby compared to the pristine decorations adorning the uniforms around her. What they could not see were the subtle details that would identify it to those with appropriate knowledge and clearance levels. The specific threading pattern, the barely visible serial numbers, the precise positioning relative to other insignia, all carried meaning that extended far beyond surface appearances. Major Kellerman decided to take a more direct approach, moving from the coffee station to a position near Elena's chair. His movement was calculated to appear casual while allowing him to examine her uniform details more closely than previous opportunities had permitted. "Excuse me, but I don't believe we've been properly introduced. I'm Major Kellerman from Strategic Planning Division. I was wondering about your current assignment and how it relates to today's briefing materials." His tone carried forced politeness that barely concealed his underlying skepticism about her legitimate presence. Elena looked up to meet his gaze directly, her dark eyes reflecting calm confidence that seemed incongruous with her modest appearance and faded uniform. Staff Sergeant Elena Vasquez, currently assigned to Special Operations Liaison duties. My clearance covers all materials being discussed in today's sessions. Her response was measured and professional, providing the minimum information necessary to answer his question without offering details that might satisfy his obvious curiosity about her background and qualifications. The exchange drew attention from nearby officers who had been conducting their own quiet speculations about Elena's identity and role. Major Kellerman found himself slightly off balance by her direct response and obvious comfort with the situation despite the surrounding skepticism. Staff Sergeant seemed inconsistent with attendance at briefings typically reserved for field-grade officers and above. Yet her manner suggested familiarity with high-level operational discussions that went beyond what her apparent rank would normally encompass. Captain Morrison approached the growing circle of conversation, his genuine curiosity overriding the social protocols that usually govern such interactions. Special Operations Liaison covers a fairly broad range of responsibilities. Would you mind sharing which specific unit or command structure you're currently supporting? His question was more diplomatic than Kellerman's direct challenge, but carried similar undertones of doubt about Elena's stated qualifications and clearance levels. Elena recognized the careful trap being constructed through seemingly innocent questions designed to reveal inconsistencies or gaps in her cover story. She had navigated similar interrogations before, had learned to provide truthful answers that satisfied immediate curiosity without compromising operational security or revealing classified information. The men surrounding her were intelligent and experienced, but they lacked the specialized knowledge necessary to understand the full implications of her responses. "Special Activities Division," she replied simply, allowing the words to settle into the sudden silence that followed her admission. The unit designation carried weight among those familiar with the most classified aspects of military operations, suggesting involvement in activities that existed far beyond conventional command structures and normal operational parameters. Major Kellerman's expression shifted subtly as he processed the implications of Elena's calm revelation about her current assignment. The coffee break was drawing to a close as General Patterson returned to the podium area, his presence automatically drawing officers back to their designated seats. Elena remained motionless throughout the transition, her brief exchange with the questioning officers having satisfied their immediate curiosity while raising entirely new questions about her background and qualifications. The faded patch on her shoulder suddenly seemed less like evidence of administrative error and more like something they should have recognized from the beginning. General Patterson resumed his presentation with tactical assessments from the European theater, his pointer tracing enemy positions across digital maps that revealed the complexity of current operations. Elena absorbed every detail with the focused attention of someone who understood that strategic briefings translated directly into life-and-death decisions for personnel operating in hostile territory. Her experience in similar environments allowed her to identify potential complications and operational challenges that might escape the notice of officers whose careers had been built primarily behind desks and in conference rooms. The mention of Special Activities Division had created a subtle shift in the atmosphere surrounding Elena's position. Major Kellerman found himself reconsidering his previous assumptions, while simultaneously questioning whether her claimed assignment was legitimate or simply a convenient deflection designed to end uncomfortable inquiries. Special activities operated in shadows that even most military personnel never glimpsed, conducting missions that officially never happened and achieving objectives that could never be publicly acknowledged or celebrated. Lieutenant Colonel Bradford remained unconvinced despite Elena's revelation about her current assignment. He leaned toward Major Phillips and whispered, "Anyone can claim affiliation with classified units. Without proper verification through official channels, we have no way to confirm whether her statements are accurate or simply elaborate fiction designed to explain her unauthorized presence." His skepticism resonated with several nearby officers who nodded in quiet agreement while maintaining attention on General Patterson's ongoing presentation. Captain Morrison discovered himself studying Elena's reactions to specific operational details being discussed from the podium. Her subtle changes in expression suggested intimate familiarity with the geographical regions and tactical challenges being analyzed, knowledge that seemed to extend beyond what standard briefing materials would provide. When General Patterson mentioned supply route vulnerabilities in mountainous terrain, Elena's slight frown indicated personal experience with similar logistical problems rather than theoretical understanding of the concepts involved. The second hour of briefing focused on personnel rotation schedules and equipment modernization programs, topics that generated active discussion among the assembled officers. Elena listened without participating, her role apparently limited to observation rather than contribution to strategic planning processes. Yet her continued presence suggested that someone at higher command levels considered her input valuable enough to warrant inclusion in discussions typically reserved for senior leadership and specialized planning staffs. Major Phillips decided to test Elena's claimed expertise through indirect questioning during a brief pause in the presentation. The supply route analysis seems particularly relevant to current operations. I imagine personnel with field experience in those regions would have valuable insights about practical implementation challenges. His comment was directed toward Elena while maintaining the appearance of general conversation, inviting her to demonstrate knowledge that would support her claimed background and qualifications. Elena recognized the continuation of their careful interrogation, disguised as professional interest in her opinions. She had spent years developing the skill of providing useful information without revealing classified details or compromising ongoing operations. Mountain operations present unique challenges that satellite imagery and theoretical planning cannot fully address. Weather patterns, local population dynamics, and terrain variables all require first-hand experience for accurate assessment and successful mission execution. Her response demonstrated genuine expertise while remaining appropriately general, but several officers noted the confidence in her voice when discussing operational complexities. Captain Morrison found his skepticism beginning to waver as he recognized the authenticity of someone who had clearly navigated the challenges she described. The way she emphasized weather patterns and local population dynamics suggested experience that extended beyond standard training exercises and into genuine combat environments. General Patterson continued with intelligence updates from multiple global regions, his presentation covering threat assessments and operational planning timelines that would guide military activities for the coming months. Elena's attention remained absolute throughout these discussions, her mind automatically cataloging information that might prove relevant to missions she could not discuss with the officers surrounding her. The classified nature of her actual responsibilities created constant tension between professional curiosity and security requirements. Lieutenant Colonel Roberts made another attempt to challenge Elena's presence through procedural objections rather than direct confrontation. "General, I believe it would be appropriate to verify security clearances for all personnel before continuing with classified material discussions. Standard protocols require confirmation of need-to-know authorization for sensitive information being shared in today's briefing sessions. His suggestion carried implications about Elena's legitimacy while maintaining the appearance of concern for proper security procedures. The general paused his presentation once again, his steel-gray eyes moving deliberately across the room before settling on Lieutenant Colonel Roberts with an expression that suggested growing impatience with continued interruptions. All personnel present today have been cleared through appropriate channels and verified for access to materials being discussed. I would prefer to complete our scheduled briefing without further procedural delays unless someone has specific evidence of security violations that require immediate attention. Elena appreciated the general's continued support while recognizing that his patience with the situation was beginning to wear thin. She had learned throughout her career that borrowed authority provided temporary protection but could not substitute for eventual recognition of her legitimate qualifications and achievements. The patch on her shoulder represented accomplishments that these officers would someday understand, operations that would finally explain her presence among personnel whose public records far exceeded her apparent credentials. The questioning pattern had established a rhythm of doubt and deflection that would continue until someone with appropriate knowledge and authority provided definitive answers about Elena's background and current assignment. Major Kellerman remained convinced that administrative error was the most logical explanation despite her confident responses to their inquiries. The faded condition of her jacket and the unremarkable appearance of her shoulder patch continued to suggest someone operating outside normal military hierarchies and recognition systems. As the briefing entered its third hour, Elena reflected on the familiar pattern of skepticism and eventual recognition that had characterized much of her military career. The officers surrounding her were intelligent and dedicated professionals whose doubts were understandable given the limited information available through standard channels. Soon enough, circumstances would provide the clarity they sought and the validation her service record deserved. The afternoon session brought a shift in briefing topics toward classified operations requiring enhanced security protocols, prompting General Patterson to activate additional countermeasures and request confirmation of clearance levels from all attendees. Elena watched as each officer provided their security classification and unit assignment, the familiar ritual serving as another opportunity for her colleagues to scrutinize her credentials and question her continued presence among personnel with obvious authority and extensive command experience. When Elena's turn arrived, she stated her clearance level with the same calm professionalism that had characterized her previous responses to skeptical inquiries. Top secret, special compartmented information, with additional program access through Special Activities Division authorization. The designation carried implications that extended far beyond standard military classifications, suggesting involvement in operations that existed at the highest levels of government secrecy and national security priority. Major Kellerman exchanged meaningful glances with Lieutenant Colonel Bradford, their silent communication expressing shared doubt about Elena's claimed clearance levels. The progression from Staff Sergeant to Special Activities Division to top secret SCI access seemed inconsistent with normal career advancement patterns and suggested either extraordinary circumstances or elaborate deception designed to maintain unauthorized access to sensitive information and high-level strategic planning sessions. Captain Morrison found himself increasingly intrigued by the contradictions surrounding Elena's presence and apparent qualifications. Her responses demonstrated genuine knowledge of operational complexities, while her appearance suggested someone operating far outside normal recognition and advancement systems. The faded jacket that had initially prompted mockery was beginning to seem less like evidence of administrative oversight and more like deliberate camouflage designed to deflect attention from her true role and responsibilities. General Patterson proceeded with intelligence briefings that covered ongoing operations in multiple classified theaters, his presentation revealing details that could compromise active missions if disclosed to unauthorized personnel. Elena listened with the intense focus of someone whose own operations might be affected by the strategic decisions being discussed, her mind automatically processing tactical implications and potential complications that could emerge from proposed policy changes and resource allocations. The classified briefing materials included satellite imagery, intercepted communications, and operational timelines that painted a comprehensive picture of current global military activities. Elena recognized several geographical locations from her own recent deployments, missions that had taken her into environments where diplomatic solutions had failed and conventional military operations proved inadequate for achieving strategic objectives. Her unique perspective allowed her to identify potential problems with proposed approaches that might escape the notice of personnel whose experience was primarily theoretical. Lieutenant Colonel Roberts decided to escalate his challenges to Elena's presence by requesting specific documentation of her clearance authorization and unit assignment. I believe it would be prudent to verify the credentials being claimed before proceeding with materials that require special program access. Standard procedures mandate confirmation of authorization through appropriate channels when questions arise about personnel qualifications and security status. His persistent objections were beginning to create obvious tension within the briefing room, dividing the assembled officers between those who shared his skepticism and others who recognized that continued challenges to General Patterson's personnel decisions bordered on insubordination. Elena remained motionless throughout the exchange, her expression revealing nothing about her thoughts regarding the escalating conflict over her legitimate presence and claimed qualifications. Major Phillips joined the growing confrontation by questioning the logic of Elena's apparent assignment and clearance levels. With respect, General, the combination of enlisted rank and special program access seems highly irregular according to normal personnel policies and security protocols. Perhaps clarification of her specific role and authorization would help resolve the concerns being raised by multiple officers regarding standard procedures and clearance verification requirements. Elena felt the familiar weight of institutional skepticism that had accompanied much of her military career, the assumption that unconventional circumstances indicated either error or deception rather than legitimate operational requirements. Her actual role within Special Activities Division involved responsibilities that could not be explained without compromising ongoing missions and revealing operational details that extended far beyond the clearance levels of most personnel questioning her presence. The tension in the room continued to escalate as more officers began to align themselves with either the skeptical faction demanding verification or those who preferred to trust General Patterson's judgment about appropriate attendance and clearance levels. Elena recognized that her continued silence was becoming interpreted as either inability to provide adequate documentation or unwillingness to submit to legitimate security inquiries from concerned personnel with valid questions about procedures. General Patterson's expression had shifted from mild irritation to barely controlled anger as the challenges to his authority became increasingly direct and persistent. The questioning of his personnel decisions was approaching the point of formal insubordination, creating a situation that would require decisive action to maintain discipline and restore proper respect for command authority within the briefing environment. Captain Morrison watched the escalating confrontation with growing concern about its potential impact on unit cohesion and professional relationships among the assembled officers. The dispute over Elena's presence had evolved beyond simple curiosity into a direct challenge to established authority that threatened to undermine the purpose and effectiveness of the strategic briefing sessions that brought them together. Elena understood that the situation was approaching a critical point where intervention from higher authority would become necessary to resolve the impasse created by persistent skepticism and legitimate security concerns. Her unique position within the military hierarchy made her simultaneously vulnerable to institutional questioning and protected by classification levels that prevented full disclosure of her qualifications and operational background. The afternoon briefing had transformed from routine strategic planning into a confrontation that would require resolution before normal operations could continue. Elena remained confident that appropriate authority would eventually provide the clarification necessary to satisfy skeptical officers while maintaining the operational security requirements that govern her actual role and responsibilities within Special Activities Division and related classified programs. The conference room door opened with unexpected force, admitting a figure whose presence immediately commanded absolute attention from every officer present. General Marcus Thornfield entered with the measured stride of someone accustomed to having entire rooms fall silent upon his arrival, his four-star insignia catching the overhead lighting as he surveyed the assembled personnel with sharp intelligence that missed nothing of importance. Elena recognized him immediately, though their previous encounters had occurred in very different circumstances and much more dangerous environments. Room attention. General Patterson's command rang out with obvious relief as 47 officers rose in perfect unison, their previous arguments and skeptical discussions instantly forgotten in the face of superior authority. General Thornfield acknowledged the courtesy with a slight nod before gesturing for everyone to resume their seats, his gray eyes already focusing on the specific individual whose presence had apparently motivated his unexpected appearance at what should have been a routine strategic briefing. I understand there have been questions raised about personnel qualifications and security clearances during today's sessions, General Thornfield stated, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who never needed to raise his tone to command respect and immediate attention. His gaze moved deliberately across the room, cataloging the faces of officers who had participated in the challenges to Elena's presence while noting their obvious discomfort under his direct scrutiny. Elena remained perfectly still as General Thornfield's attention settled on her position near the back wall, his expression revealing recognition that extended far beyond casual familiarity with her official records and current assignment. Their shared history included operations that could never be officially acknowledged, missions that had required the highest levels of trust and professional competence under circumstances where failure meant consequences extending far beyond individual careers and advancement opportunities. Lieutenant Colonel Bradford found himself wishing he could disappear entirely as General Thornfield's gaze lingered on him with obvious disapproval. His earlier comments about Elena's apparent qualifications and the challenges he had raised about her security clearances suddenly seemed not just inappropriate, but potentially career-damaging given the four-star general's obvious familiarity with the situation and his protective stance regarding her continued presence. Major Kellerman experienced similar discomfort as he realized that his persistent questioning about Elena's background and credentials had been observed and evaluated by someone whose opinion could determine the future trajectory of his military career. The casual mockery that had seemed appropriate when directed toward an apparently misplaced staff sergeant now appeared to have been directed toward someone with connections extending to the highest levels of military command structure. General Thornfield moved to the front of the room with deliberate steps that emphasized his authority and created additional tension among officers who had participated in the afternoon's confrontational discussions. Staff Sergeant Vasquez has been operating under my direct authority for the past 18 months, conducting missions that require the highest levels of security clearance and professional competence. Her presence at today's briefing was specifically requested and personally authorized. The revelation transformed the atmosphere within the conference room as officers began to comprehend the implications of their skeptical comments and persistent challenges to Elena's qualifications. Captain Morrison felt a mixture of embarrassment and growing curiosity about the nature of operations that would place a staff sergeant under the direct authority of a four-star general and require her attendance at strategic briefings typically reserved for senior command personnel. Elena appreciated General Thornfield's intervention while recognizing that his presence would create new complications regarding operational security and the need to maintain appropriate levels of classification around her actual responsibilities. His public acknowledgement of their professional relationship provided validation that silenced skeptical voices but also drew attention to activities that operated best in shadows and bureaucratic anonymity. The patch on Elena's shoulder suddenly took on entirely different significance as officers began to reconsider their previous dismissive observations and casual mockery. What had appeared to be faded and unremarkable insignia now seemed like something they should have recognized from the beginning, evidence of achievements and service that extended far beyond their current understanding and clearance levels. Major Phillips found himself studying Elena's uniform details with new appreciation for subtleties that had escaped his previous attention. The precise positioning of her insignia, the particular style of her jacket, and especially the mysterious patch that had attracted so much negative comment, now suggested careful attention to details that most personnel would never encounter or understand within normal military hierarchies. General Thornfield continued his address with barely concealed irritation at the treatment Elena had received during the afternoon sessions. Staff Sergeant Vasquez has conducted operations that have directly contributed to national security objectives and saved American lives under circumstances that cannot be discussed in this forum. Her service record includes achievements that warrant respect rather than skepticism from personnel whose own contributions pale in comparison. Lieutenant Colonel Roberts realized that his procedural objections and demands for verification had been directed towards someone whose actual qualifications exceeded those of most officers present in the room. His attempts to exclude Elena from classified briefings now appeared not just inappropriate, but potentially damaging to operations that extended far beyond his current knowledge and authorization levels. The transformation in officer attitudes was immediate and obvious as personnel who had questioned Elena's presence began to recalibrate their understanding of military hierarchies and recognition systems. Her modest appearance and faded uniform had concealed achievements that commanded respect from the highest levels of command authority, operations that existed in classified realms where conventional advancement patterns and public recognition were neither possible nor appropriate. Elena observed the changing dynamics with professional detachment, understanding that General Thornfield's intervention had resolved immediate challenges to her presence while creating new complications for future operations that depended on maintaining low visibility and bureaucratic anonymity. The attention she had sought to avoid was now focused directly on her unique position within classified command structures that most personnel would never understand. General Thornfield's presence had fundamentally altered the conference room dynamics, but the questions surrounding Elena's patch and background remained unresolved among officers whose curiosity had been amplified rather than satisfied by the four-star general's protective intervention. Major Kellerman found himself studying her shoulder insignia with new intensity, trying to identify details that might explain why such a modest-appearing decoration commanded respect from the highest levels of military authority and warranted personal intervention from someone whose responsibilities spanned multiple global theaters. The patch itself appeared unremarkable to casual observation. Its colors faded from what Elena assumed was extensive field use and multiple deployment cycles. Captain Morrison noticed subtle elements that suggested specialized unit designation, though nothing immediately recognizable from standard military reference materials or conventional organizational charts. The threading pattern seemed deliberately understated, designed to deflect rather than attract attention from personnel lacking appropriate clearance levels and operational knowledge. Lieutenant Colonel Bradford struggled with the cognitive dissonance created by General Thornfield's revelation about Elena's qualifications and the obvious disconnect between her appearance and her claimed achievements. His institutional experience suggested that personnel operating at such classified levels typically displayed visible indicators of their status through prestigious assignments, advanced education credentials, or distinguished service awards that commanded immediate recognition and professional respect. Elena remained aware of the continued scrutiny directed toward her uniform and insignia, understanding that General Thornfield's intervention had satisfied immediate challenges to her presence without resolving underlying questions about her background and operational role. The officers surrounding her possessed the intelligence and institutional knowledge necessary to recognize that significant gaps remained in their understanding of her unique position within classified command structures. Major Phillips decided to approach the situation more diplomatically, addressing General Thornfield directly rather than continuing to challenge Elena's credentials through indirect questioning and procedural objections. General, would it be possible to provide additional context about Staff Sergeant Vasquez's operational background that might help us better understand her specialized role and the nature of her contributions to strategic planning processes? His request was carefully phrased to demonstrate respect for authority while expressing legitimate professional curiosity. General Thornfield considered the question with obvious reluctance, recognizing that providing additional information about Elena's background would necessarily compromise operational security requirements while failing to satisfy the curiosity of officers whose clearance levels prevented full disclosure of her actual responsibilities and achievements. The classified nature of her work created inherent tensions between transparency and security that could not be easily resolved through partial explanations. Staff Sergeant Vasquez has operated in environments where conventional military protocols proved inadequate for mission success. The general replied carefully, his response providing information while maintaining appropriate security boundaries. Her specialized training and operational experience have made her invaluable for situations requiring unconventional approaches and direct action capabilities that extend beyond normal command structures and organizational hierarchies. The carefully worded explanation generated more questions than answers among officers whose professional experience included familiarity with special operations units and classified programs that operated outside conventional military channels. Captain Morrison recognized the language patterns typically associated with activities that officially never happened, missions conducted by personnel whose achievements could never be publicly acknowledged or celebrated through normal recognition systems. Elena appreciated General Thornfield's diplomatic approach to explaining her background without compromising ongoing operations or revealing details that could affect national security objectives. Her actual role within Special Activities Division involved responsibilities that would require significantly higher clearance levels than most officers present possessed, operations that existed in bureaucratic shadows, where conventional advancement patterns and public recognition were neither possible nor appropriate for operational success. The afternoon briefing resumed with General Thornfield remaining present to observe discussions that had been interrupted by challenges to Elena's qualifications and security clearances. His continued presence served as implicit protection for Elena, while simultaneously creating pressure on officers who had participated in the skeptical questioning to demonstrate appropriate professional respect and avoid further challenges to established authority and personnel decisions. Lieutenant Colonel Roberts found himself reconsidering every comment he had made about procedural violations and security concerns, realizing that his objections had been directed towards someone whose actual qualifications exceeded those of most personnel present in the room. The irony was not lost on him that his attempts to exclude Elena from classified briefings had potentially compromised operations that extended far beyond his current knowledge and authorization levels. Major Kellerman observed Elena's reactions to ongoing strategic discussions with new appreciation for subtle indicators of genuine expertise and operational experience. Her focused attention and occasional slight changes in expression suggested intimate familiarity with geographical regions and tactical challenges being analyzed, knowledge that extended beyond theoretical understanding to include personal experience with similar operational complexities and environmental challenges. The mysterious patch on Elena's shoulder continued to attract attention from officers who were beginning to understand that their initial dismissive observations had been directed toward insignia representing achievements they lacked the clearance to comprehend fully. The faded appearance that had prompted mockery now seemed like evidence of extensive field use under circumstances that most personnel would never encounter during normal military careers. Elena reflected on the familiar pattern of skepticism followed by grudging recognition that had characterized much of her professional experience within classified operations and special programs. The officers surrounding her were intelligent and dedicated professionals whose doubts had been understandable given the limited information available through standard channels and conventional personnel records that could not reflect her actual contributions and operational background. General Thornfield's intervention had provided temporary resolution to immediate challenges, while creating new complications for future operations that depended on maintaining bureaucratic anonymity and avoiding attention from personnel whose curiosity might compromise ongoing missions and classified objectives that required absolute discretion for successful completion. The strategic briefing continued with increased tension as General Thornfield's presence created an undercurrent of professional anxiety among officers who had challenged Elena's qualifications throughout the afternoon sessions. Major Kellerman found himself avoiding direct eye contact with both the four-star general and Elena, his earlier confident assertions about administrative errors now seeming potentially career-damaging given the obvious high-level protection surrounding her classified assignment and operational background. Captain Morrison decided to focus his attention entirely on the briefing materials being presented, though he remained acutely aware of Elena's continued presence and the growing mystery surrounding her shoulder patch and specialized role within Special Activities Division. The faded insignia that had initially prompted dismissive comments now commanded his respectful curiosity, representing achievements and service that clearly extended far beyond his current understanding and clearance levels. Lieutenant Colonel Bradford struggled with mounting embarrassment as he recalled his specific comments about Elena's jacket and appearance, particularly his suggestion that someone should establish dress codes to maintain proper standards during high-level briefings. General Thornfield's intervention had made clear that Elena's modest appearance concealed qualifications that exceeded those of most personnel present, making his previous criticism seem both inappropriate and professionally damaging. Elena observed the changing dynamics with professional detachment, understanding that General Thornfield's protective intervention had resolved immediate challenges to her presence while creating new complications for maintaining the low profile that her operational assignments typically required. The attention she had sought to avoid was now focused directly on her unique position within classified command structures that operated outside conventional military hierarchies. The afternoon presentation covered intelligence assessments from Southeast Asian operations, regions where Elena had conducted multiple deployments under circumstances that could never be officially acknowledged or documented through normal personnel records. Her subtle reactions to specific geographical references and tactical discussions suggested intimate familiarity with operational challenges that extended beyond theoretical knowledge to include personal experience with similar environmental complexities. Major Phillips attempted to demonstrate appropriate respect through careful attention to Elena's occasional comments during strategic discussions, recognizing that her insights carried weight that extended far beyond her apparent rank and modest appearance. Her responses revealed analytical capabilities and operational expertise that supported General Thornfield's characterization of her specialized role and unique qualifications for classified assignments requiring unconventional approaches. General Thornfield remained strategically positioned where he could observe both the ongoing briefing and the reactions of officers who had questioned Elena's presence throughout the day. His continued surveillance served as implicit warning that further challenges to her qualifications would be viewed as direct challenges to his authority and judgment regarding personnel decisions and operational requirements. The patch on Elena's shoulder had become a focal point for speculation among officers whose professional curiosity had been heightened rather than satisfied by the partial explanations provided about her background and current assignment. Lieutenant Colonel Roberts found himself studying the insignia from multiple angles, trying to identify details that might explain its significance to someone of General Thornfield's stature and operational experience. Elena recognized the familiar pattern of institutional curiosity that accompanied her presence at briefings typically reserved for senior command personnel and specialized planning staffs. Her unique position within classified operations created inherent tensions between operational security requirements and a natural desire of professional military officers to understand command structures and personnel qualifications through conventional channels and recognition systems. Captain Morrison noted Elena's consistent focus on briefing materials despite the obvious discomfort created by continued scrutiny from personnel whose skepticism had been publicly challenged and corrected by superior authority. Her professional composure under pressure suggested experience with similar situations where her qualifications had been questioned by personnel lacking appropriate clearance levels and operational knowledge. The strategic discussions revealed increasing complexity in global operations that required specialized personnel capable of conducting missions outside conventional military frameworks and normal organizational hierarchies. Elena's presence at such briefings suggested involvement in activities that bridged multiple command structures and operational theaters, responsibilities that would explain both her unique clearance levels and the protective intervention from General Thornfield. Major Kellerman began to appreciate the sophisticated nature of operations that would require personnel with Elena's apparent qualifications and specialized background, though his understanding remained limited by security boundaries that prevented full disclosure of classified activities and operational details. The mysterious circumstances surrounding her assignment were beginning to seem less like administrative oversight and more like deliberate operational security measures. Lieutenant Colonel Bradford realized that his procedural objections and security concerns had been directed towards someone whose actual responsibilities included activities that extended far beyond his current authorization levels and operational knowledge. The irony was becoming apparent that his attempts to verify Elena's qualifications had potentially compromised operations that required absolute discretion for successful completion. Elena reflected on the challenges created by operating within classified programs that necessitated maintaining cover stories and bureaucratic anonymity while attending briefings where her expertise was genuinely needed for strategic planning and operational assessment. The tension between visibility and security created constant complications for personnel whose achievements could never be publicly acknowledged or celebrated through normal recognition channels. General Thornfield's protective stance had established clear boundaries around further questioning of Elena's qualifications while simultaneously drawing attention to her unique position within command structures that operated outside conventional military protocols and advancement patterns. The intervention had been necessary, but would create ongoing complications for future operations requiring bureaucratic invisibility. The final segment of the afternoon briefing approached with palpable tension as General Thornfield prepared to depart, leaving behind questions that his intervention had amplified rather than resolved among officers whose curiosity about Elena's background had reached uncomfortable levels. Major Kellerman found himself dreading the moment when the four-star general's protective presence would be removed, potentially creating opportunity for renewed challenges to Elena's qualifications from personnel whose skepticism had been temporarily suppressed rather than eliminated. Elena sensed the approaching transition with professional concern, understanding that General Thornfield's departure would leave her vulnerable to renewed questioning from officers whose institutional curiosity had been heightened by partial revelations about her classified role and operational background. Her position within Special Activities Division required maintaining operational security that could be compromised by excessive attention from personnel lacking appropriate clearance levels and NITANO authorization. Captain Morrison observed the subtle dynamics playing out between Elena and the assembled officers, recognizing that underlying tensions remained unresolved despite General Thornfield's authoritative intervention on her behalf. The faded patch on her shoulder continued to attract speculation and scrutiny from personnel whose professional experience suggested it represented achievements they should recognize but somehow could not identify through conventional military knowledge and reference systems. Lieutenant Colonel Bradford struggled with growing anxiety about potential consequences from his earlier challenges to Elena's presence and qualifications, particularly his direct questioning of General Patterson's personnel decisions and security protocols. The revelation of Elena's high-level connections and classified assignments had transformed his procedural objections from appropriate security concerns into potentially career-damaging displays of institutional ignorance and professional disrespect. General Thornfield addressed the assembled officers with measured authority that carried clear warnings about future treatment of Elena in respect for classified operations that extended beyond their current understanding and authorization levels. Staff Sergeant Vasquez will continue attending briefings as operational requirements dictate. I trust that all personnel will demonstrate appropriate professional courtesy and avoid unnecessary complications regarding her presence and participation in strategic planning processes. His words carried implications that extended beyond simple requests for professional courtesy, suggesting that continued challenges to Elena's qualifications would be viewed as direct challenges to his authority and operational judgment. Major Phillips nodded respectfully while mentally cataloging the specific language patterns that indicated serious consequences for personnel who failed to demonstrate appropriate respect for classified assignments and specialized operational roles. Elena appreciated General Thornfield's continued protection while recognizing that his public intervention had created new visibility that could complicate future operations requiring bureaucratic anonymity and operational invisibility. Her unique position within classified command structures depended on maintaining low profiles that allowed her to operate effectively without drawing attention from personnel whose curiosity might compromise ongoing missions and national security objectives. The mysterious patch on her shoulder had become a symbol of institutional puzzlement among officers whose combined military experience encompassed multiple decades of service across various specialized units and classified programs. Lieutenant Colonel Roberts found himself mentally reviewing reference materials and insignia databases, tried to identify organizational affiliations that might explain the faded decoration's significance to someone of General Thornfield's operational stature. Captain Morrison recognized the sophisticated operational security measures that would necessitate Elena's modest appearance and unremarkable uniform details, understanding that personnel conducting the most sensitive missions often maintained cover identities that deflected attention from their actual roles and qualifications. The deliberate ordinariness of her presentation now seemed like carefully crafted camouflage designed to enable operational effectiveness through bureaucratic invisibility. General Thornfield departed with final warnings implicit in his parting glance toward officers who had challenged Elena's presence throughout the afternoon sessions. His protective intervention had established clear boundaries around future questioning, while simultaneously drawing unwanted attention to operations that functioned best in administrative shadows and classification levels that prevented public recognition or conventional advancement acknowledgement. Elena observed the immediate change in conference room dynamics as General Thornfield's departure removed the authoritative buffer that had protected her from direct confrontation and persistent questioning about her background and qualifications. The officers surrounding her possessed sufficient intelligence and institutional knowledge to recognize that significant gaps remained in their understanding of her unique position within classified command structures and operational hierarchies. Major Kellerman found himself reconsidering every aspect of Elena's presence and apparent qualifications, trying to reconcile her modest appearance with the obvious high-level protection and specialized assignments that had been revealed through General Thornfield's intervention. The cognitive dissonance created by conflicting evidence about her background and operational role suggested complexities that extended far beyond his current clearance levels and professional experience. Lieutenant Colonel Bradford realized that his skeptical comments and procedural objections had been directed towards someone whose actual achievements probably exceeded those of most personnel present in the briefing room. The embarrassment of having his institutional assumptions proven wrong was compounded by awareness that his challenges had potentially compromised operations requiring absolute discretion for successful completion. Elena reflected on the familiar pattern of skepticism followed by protective intervention that had characterized much of her career within classified operations and special programs. The officers questioning her presence were intelligent professionals whose doubts were understandable given limited information available through conventional channels, though their persistence in challenging established authority had created unnecessary complications for ongoing operational security requirements. The afternoon briefing concluded with unresolved tensions and amplified curiosity among personnel whose questions about Elena's background had been answered only partially, creating new mysteries about her specialized role and the nature of operations that would require such elaborate security measures and high-level protection from institutional challenges and procedural scrutiny. Captain Morrison understood that Elena's continued presence at future briefings would serve as constant reminder of classified operations and personnel assignments that existed outside his current knowledge and authorization levels, suggesting depths to military activities that extended far beyond conventional command structures and public recognition systems. The conference room settled into uncomfortable silence as General Thornfield's footsteps faded down the corridor, leaving behind an atmosphere charged with unresolved questions and institutional tension among officers whose skepticism had been temporarily suppressed but not eliminated by his authoritative intervention. Elena felt the immediate shift in dynamics as protective authority departed, exposing her once again to the collective scrutiny of personnel whose curiosity about her background had been heightened rather than satisfied by partial revelations. Major Kellerman exchanged meaningful glances with Lieutenant Colonel Bradford, their silent communication expressing shared determination to pursue answers about Elena's qualifications and operational role despite General Thornfield's obvious displeasure with previous challenges to her presence. The four-star general's departure had removed the immediate threat of career consequences, creating opportunity for renewed questioning through more diplomatic approaches that might avoid direct confrontation with established authority. Captain Morrison found himself studying Elena's patch with renewed intensity, trying to identify subtle details that might explain its significance to someone of General Thornfield's operational experience and strategic responsibilities. The faded insignia seemed deliberately designed to deflect casual observation, while containing elements that would be recognizable to personnel with appropriate clearance levels and specialized knowledge of classified operations and organizational structures. Elena recognized the approaching moment of truth that had been building throughout the afternoon sessions, understanding that her continued presence without protective intervention would inevitably lead to more direct challenges from officers whose institutional curiosity demanded resolution. Her position within Special Activities Division had survived similar situations before, though always with risks to operational security and mission effectiveness that extended beyond personal comfort and professional recognition. Lieutenant Colonel Roberts decided to test the boundaries established by General Thornfield's warnings through carefully phrased inquiries that might appear to respect his authority, while satisfying persistent questions about Elena's background and qualifications. Staff Sergeant, would you be comfortable sharing additional details about your operational experience that might help us better understand your unique perspective on the strategic challenges being discussed in today's briefing sessions? His diplomatic approach represented a calculated attempt to extract information without appearing to challenge established authority or violate the implicit boundaries that General Thornfield had established around further questioning of Elena's credentials and specialized assignments. The request was framed as seeking professional insights rather than demanding verification of qualifications that had already been vouched for by superior authority. Elena considered her response carefully, understanding that providing additional information would necessarily compromise operational security requirements while failing to satisfy the curiosity of officers whose clearance levels prevented full disclosure of her actual responsibilities and achievements. Her specialized role within classified operations created inherent tensions between transparency and security that could not be easily resolved through partial explanations or diplomatic deflection. Major Phillips joined the renewed inquiry with questions designed to appear professionally appropriate, while probing for details that might resolve the cognitive dissonance created by Elena's modest appearance and obvious high-level connections. Your insights during today's discussions have demonstrated genuine expertise with operational challenges in multiple geographic regions. Would it be possible to share more context about your deployment experience? and specialized training background? The carefully worded questions represented collective determination among skeptical officers to pursue answers despite General Thornfield's protective intervention and explicit warnings about appropriate professional courtesy. Their institutional experience suggested that persistence through diplomatic channels might succeed where direct challenges had failed, providing information that would satisfy curiosity without appearing to violate established boundaries. Elena felt the familiar pressure of institutional questioning that had accompanied much of her career within classified operations, understanding that her unique position created natural curiosity among personnel whose conventional military experience provided insufficient context for comprehending specialized roles and unconventional advancement patterns. The officers surrounding her were intelligent professionals whose doubts were understandable given limited information available through standard channels. Captain Morrison observed Elena's careful consideration of the questions being directed toward her, recognizing signs of someone accustomed to operating under security constraints that prevented full disclosure of operational background and specialized qualifications. Her measured responses suggested experience with similar situations where professional curiosity conflicted with classification requirements and operational security needs. The renewed questioning had created another critical moment where Elena's continued presence would require either additional protective intervention from higher authority or careful navigation of institutional curiosity through responses that satisfied immediate concerns without compromising ongoing operations. Her specialized role within Special Activities Division had survived similar challenges before, though always with complications for future operational effectiveness. Lieutenant Colonel Bradford pressed forward with additional inquiries designed to appear respectful, while extracting information that might explain the disconnect between Elena's appearance and her obvious qualifications for attending high-level strategic briefings. The combination of enlisted rank and special program access continues to seem highly unusual according to normal personnel policies and advancement patterns that we understand through conventional military experience. Elena understood that the questioning pattern had established a rhythm that would continue until someone with appropriate authority provided definitive answers or circumstances forced revelation of information that she was not authorized to disclose without compromising operational security. The persistent curiosity of intelligent officers had created a situation requiring careful management to protect ongoing missions while maintaining professional relationships. Major Kellerman sensed that Elena's responses were constrained by security requirements rather than inability to provide adequate explanations, suggesting that her actual background included achievements and assignments that extended far beyond her current authorization to discuss openly. The careful limitation of her answers indicated operational security measures rather than institutional deception or administrative error as originally suspected. The persistent questioning had reached a crescendo when the conference room doors opened once more, admitting a figure whose presence commanded even greater attention than General Thornfield's earlier intervention. General William Hartwell entered with the measured dignity of someone whose 4 decades of military service had culminated in responsibilities that spanned the highest levels of national security and strategic planning, his chest displaying ribbons that represented conflicts and operations spanning multiple generations of American military history. Elena rose instinctively to attention as she recognized the approaching figure, her movement reflecting respect that extended far beyond normal military protocol to encompass personal gratitude for someone whose decisions had shaped her career and enabled her survival through operations that had tested the limits of human endurance and professional capability. General Hartwell had been present during some of her most challenging assignments, had made decisions that determined mission success and personnel survival under circumstances that could never be publicly acknowledged. The assembled officers followed Elena's lead in rising to attention, though their recognition of General Hartwell was based on his legendary reputation rather than personal experience with his operational decisions and strategic leadership. Major Kellerman felt his previous confidence in challenging Elena's qualifications evaporate entirely as he realized that her respectful response to the general's presence suggested professional relationships that extended to the very highest levels of military command and national security responsibility. General Hartwell acknowledged the courtesy with a slight nod before moving directly toward Elena's position, his path through the conference room creating a corridor of respectful silence among officers whose afternoon of skeptical questioning suddenly seemed inappropriate and potentially career-damaging. His focused attention on Elena left no doubt about the purpose of his unexpected appearance at what should have been a routine strategic briefing session. "Staff Sergeant Vasquez," the general said quietly, his voice carrying across the silent room with authority that commanded absolute attention from every person present. "I understand there have been questions raised about your qualifications and security clearances during today's sessions. Perhaps it would be appropriate to provide some additional context about your service record and current operational assignment for the benefit of these officers." Elena felt a mixture of relief and apprehension as General Hartwell's presence promised resolution to the afternoon's persistent questioning while potentially compromising operational security measures that had protected her specialized role for more than 2 decades. His decision to intervene personally suggested that institutional challenges to her presence had reached levels requiring definitive response from the highest possible authority within military command structures. General Hartwell turned to address the assembled officers with measured authority that left no room for continued skepticism or procedural objections. "Staff Sergeant Vasquez has operated under deep cover assignments for the past 23 years, conducting missions that have directly prevented terrorist attacks on American soil and eliminated threats to national security that extended far beyond conventional military capabilities and standard operational protocols." The revelation struck the conference room like a physical blow, transforming every assumption that officers had made about Elena's background and qualifications throughout the afternoon sessions. Captain Morrison felt his earlier skepticism transform into profound embarrassment as he realized that his casual dismissal had been directed towards someone whose achievements exceeded those of virtually every person present in the room. Lieutenant Colonel Bradford experienced immediate recognition that his procedural challenges and security concerns had been directed towards someone whose actual clearance levels and operational experience far exceeded his own authorization and professional background. The irony was overwhelming that his attempts to exclude Elena from classified briefings had potentially compromised operations that required the highest levels of security and operational discretion. Elena remained at attention as General Hartwell continued his explanation, understanding that his public revelation of her background would fundamentally alter her operational capabilities while providing the institutional recognition that her service record deserved. The careful balance between security and acknowledgement that had characterized her career was shifting toward transparency that carried both validation and complication for future assignments. Major Phillips found himself reconsidering every interaction he had witnessed between Elena and the briefing materials, recognizing that her focused attention and occasional subtle reactions had reflected genuine operational experience with the geographical regions and tactical challenges being discussed. Her insights have been based on personal knowledge rather than theoretical understanding, experience gained through missions that most personnel could never imagine. The mysterious patch on Elena's shoulder suddenly commanded new respect as officers began to understand that their dismissive observations had been directed toward insignia representing achievements that extended far beyond their current comprehension and security clearances. General Hartwell noticed their attention and moved closer to Elena's position, his next words carrying implications that would transform their understanding completely. "The Decoration Staff Sergeant Vasquez represents operations that have saved thousands of American lives through intelligence gathering and direct action missions conducted in hostile territory, where conventional military approaches proved inadequate for achieving strategic objectives," General Hartwell explained, his voice carrying the weight of personal knowledge about sacrifices and achievements that could never be fully disclosed or publicly celebrated. Major Kellerman realized that the faded appearance of Elena's patch reflected extensive field use under circumstances that most military personnel would never encounter during normal careers. Operations that required absolute secrecy and could not be acknowledged through conventional recognition systems and advancement protocols. The modest decoration concealed achievements that warranted the highest honors available within military hierarchies. Elena felt the familiar mixture of validation and vulnerability that accompanied moments when her classified service received public acknowledgement from authority figures whose support had enabled her survival and mission success throughout more than 2 decades of specialized operations. General Hartwell's intervention provided institutional recognition while necessarily compromising the operational anonymity that her future assignments would require for continued effectiveness. General Hartwell's revelation had transformed the conference room atmosphere completely, replacing afternoon skepticism with profound respect and institutional embarrassment among officers whose dismissive comments now seemed not just inappropriate, but deeply shameful given the extraordinary nature of Elena's service record and operational achievements. The silence that followed his explanation carried weight that extended far beyond normal military courtesy to encompass genuine awe for someone whose sacrifices had protected American lives through missions that could never be publicly acknowledged or celebrated. Major Kellerman rose from his chair with obvious difficulty, his movement reflecting the emotional weight of recognition that his casual mockery had been directed towards someone whose service exceeded his ability to comprehend fully. General Hartwell, Staff Sergeant Vasquez, I owe both of you profound apologies for my comments and behavior during today's sessions. My assumptions and challenges were based on ignorance rather than legitimate security concerns, and I deeply regret any disrespect shown towards Staff Sergeant Vasquez's extraordinary service record. His formal apology opened floodgates of similar acknowledgments from officers whose afternoon of skeptical questioning had been revealed as institutional failure to recognize genuine heroism and exceptional achievement operating within their midst. Captain Morrison stood with visible emotion, his voice carrying obvious shame as he addressed Elena directly for the first time with appropriate respect and recognition. Staff Sergeant Vasquez, I cannot adequately express my regret for the dismissive treatment you received today. Your service and sacrifices deserve recognition and honor far beyond what any of us present have contributed to national security and the protection of American lives. Please accept my sincere apologies and profound gratitude for operations that have kept our nation safe through means we were privileged to remain ignorant about. Elena accepted the apologies with professional grace while internally processing the complex emotions that accompanied moments when her classified achievements received public acknowledgement from colleagues whose respect she had earned through sacrifice rather than conventional advancement. The transformation in their attitudes reflected institutional recognition that her modest appearance had concealed contributions that exceeded those of virtually everyone present in the conference room. Lieutenant Colonel Bradford approached Elena with obvious humility, his earlier confidence in challenging her presence replaced by genuine respect for someone whose qualifications had been proven beyond any reasonable doubt. Staff Sergeant, my procedural objections and security concerns were misguided attempts to maintain standards that you have exceeded through service I cannot begin to comprehend. Your presence at these briefings is not just appropriate but necessary, and I apologize for my institutional blindness. General Hartwell observed the transformation with satisfaction tempered by awareness that Elena's operational effectiveness will be permanently altered by the public revelation of her background and achievements. Her future assignments would require different approaches to maintaining security and operational anonymity, though her extraordinary experience and proven capabilities would continue to serve national security objectives through modified operational frameworks. Elena felt profound gratitude for the recognition and respect that General Hartwell's intervention had generated, while understanding that her career was entering a new phase where different challenges and opportunities would emerge from increased visibility within military command structures. The careful balance between anonymity and effectiveness that had characterized her previous assignments would necessarily evolve toward more conventional acknowledgement and institutional integration. Major Phillips stood to address both Elena and General Hartwell with obvious emotion, his voice reflecting genuine appreciation for service that had operated in shadows to protect personnel, like himself, who remained safe through sacrifices they had never recognized or acknowledged. Staff Sergeant Vasquez, your service represents the finest traditions of American military dedication and personal sacrifice. We are honored to serve alongside someone whose achievements have protected our nation through means that extend far beyond our current understanding. The officers who had spent the afternoon questioning Elena's qualifications now found themselves in the presence of someone whose actual achievements warranted admiration and institutional respect rather than skeptical inquiry and procedural challenges. Captain Morrison realized that her modest demeanor and unremarkable appearance had been carefully cultivated to enable operational effectiveness rather than reflecting limited qualifications or administrative oversight. Elena appreciated the sincere apologies while recognizing that the officers who had questioned her presence were intelligent professionals whose skepticism had been understandable given the limited information available through conventional military channels and personnel records. Their transformation from doubt to respect reflected institutional learning rather than personal failure, evidence of intellectual honesty and professional integrity when confronted with accurate information. General Hartwell addressed the assembled officers with final observations about the nature of classified operations and the personnel who conducted missions requiring absolute discretion and operational anonymity. The men and women who serve in roles like Staff Sergeant Vasquez's operate without public recognition or conventional advancement opportunities, protecting our nation through sacrifices that most personnel will never understand or appreciate until circumstances require revelation of their extraordinary contributions. If this story moved you, share your thoughts about your favorite moment, or tell us about someone you know whose service deserved more recognition than they received. Sometimes the most extraordinary achievements happen in shadows, carried out by people whose modest appearance conceals contributions that extend far beyond what most of us could imagine or accomplish. The afternoon briefing concluded with transformed relationships and mutual respect among personnel whose initial skepticism had evolved into genuine appreciation for Elena's extraordinary service record and operational achievements. The faded patch on her shoulder now commanded the recognition it had always deserved, representing sacrifices and accomplishments that would inspire continued dedication to national security objectives and military excellence throughout their respective careers. Elena reflected on the afternoon's journey from dismissive questioning to institutional recognition, understanding that her future assignments would operate within different parameters while maintaining the same commitment to protecting American lives through whatever means proved necessary for mission success and national security preservation.